So, have you ever walked away from an incredibly awkward conversation and realized that neither of you actually said what you meant, but somehow you both understood exactly what was going on? Honestly, it happens all the time. We drop words, we leave sentences hanging in midair, we answer straightforward questions with totally unrelated statements, and yet somehow we survive socially. Well, today we are diving into this explainer to look at discourse analysis. We're going to uncover the actual unwritten detective work that we all do in our heads every single day to make sense of messy communication. Take this classic bit from Jerry Seinfeld. He's pointing out the total absurdity of squashing a bug, and he asks the cockroach, "Could you do me a favor and hold still? I'd like to eat you alive." The sheer brilliance of this joke relies entirely on our invisible rules of timing. Because without a pause between the polite request and the sudden violent threat, the sentence structurally collapses into one massive, super confusing favor. It just goes to show that human communication is not just the dictionary definition of the words we use. It's the space between them. It's the unsaid rules. Here's a quick roadmap of what we'll be covering: beyond the sentence, cohesion versus coherence, the rules of conversation, reading between the lines, and finally, schemas and scripts. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Beyond the sentence, making sense of the messy. Think back to your school days for a second. We spent years sitting at desks learning about nouns, verbs, subject-verb agreement, building the perfect, structurally sound sentence. But real life is incredibly messy. We abandon strict grammar the second we walk out of the classroom. For example, how do we understand a simple shop window sign that just says, "No shoes, no service"? Think about it. There are literally zero verbs here. It's just a fragment, a couple of nouns paired with a negative. If you fed this into an early, rigid computer program, it would completely crash. And yet, you walk past signs like this every day, and without a second of hesitation, you magically turn those four words into a clear, conditional rule. You instantly know what it implies. If you are wearing no shoes, you will receive no service. Your brain does the heavy lifting to fill in those grammatical gaps. And that brings us to discourse analysis, which is basically just the academic term for this exact detective work. It's the study of language beyond the sentence. It asks the really big, fascinating question: how do language users successfully interpret what other language users actually intend to convey, even when the literal words fall entirely short? Notice that word, intend? It's all about uncovering the intent hiding underneath the fragmented language we use every day. Moving on to Section 2. Cohesion versus coherence, the clues and the leaps. So let's look closely at how we connect the dots. There's an absolutely crucial difference between the physical clues left in a text and the mental leaps our brains take to piece them together. Think of it kind of like this. Cohesion represents the literal ties and connections printed on a page. It's the physical glue. Things like pronouns referring back to nouns, conjunctions like however or therefore, or keeping a consistent verb tense. But coherence? Coherence doesn't actually exist in the words themselves. It exists entirely inside you. It's the psychological sense-making that you apply to make disjointed things fit together. Cohesion is the ink, coherence is the thought. Let me prove to you just how much of the work your brain is actually doing. Imagine a couple in an apartment, and listen to this incredibly brief dialogue. "That's the telephone. I'm in the bath." "Okay." Now, there are absolutely zero physical cohesive ties here. No because, no therefore, no matching subjects. Yet, it makes total coherent sense to us as a declined request, right? We intuitively understand the unspoken context. She's making an indirect request to answer the phone, he's stating a physical reason he can't comply, and she is accepting that excuse. We supply the coherence to a conversation where the mechanics are mostly invisible. Section 3. The rules of conversation. The interrogation. Now we shift to the actual physical mechanics of talking. Conversation isn't just randomly throwing words at each other. It is a highly synchronized, unwritten game of holding the floor, and navigating it feels almost like a physical sport. In English, successful conversation requires taking turns. As active participants, we're constantly monitoring each other for subtle, unwritten indicators so we know exactly when it's our turn to speak without awkwardly overlapping. We signal what's called a completion point by asking a direct question, or maybe we pause slightly at the end of a phrase. We even physically drop our pitch or volume, trailing off at the end of a sentence. Kind of like that. We use these tiny physical cues to pass the conversational baton. Sometimes, of course, we need a second to think, but we really don't want to give up our turn. So what do? We use hesitation markers. We say or you know to literally hold the floor while our brain catches up. But despite these little territorial battles for airtime, Conversation is a highly cooperative social activity. We genuinely want this intricate dance to succeed, so we actively work together to keep the rhythm going.
Section 4. Reading between the lines. The motive.
Okay, let's dive into why we automatically assume people are making sense when, on the surface, they seemingly aren't. This is where we get into the hidden motives of speakers. Unveiled by the philosopher Paul Grice, these 4 maxims are the secret, underlying cooperative principles we expect our partners to obey. First, quantity. We subconsciously expect people to give just enough information. If you ask someone the time and they give you a 10-minute history of Swiss clockmaking, they violated quantity. Second is quality. We expect them to tell the truth. If they confidently lie about the sky being green, communication breaks down. Third, relation. We expect them to be relevant to the topic. Ask about the weather, and if they start talking about cheese, it's super jarring. And finally, manner. We expect them to speak clearly and logically, not in confusing riddles.
Because we implicitly trust that the speaker is following these maxims, especially the rules of relation and quantity, we become absolute masters of what linguists call implicature. Imagine someone asks, "Are you coming to the party tonight?" And you reply, "I've got an exam tomorrow." Strictly speaking, you didn't even answer their question. It is a complete non sequitur. But because the listener assumes your statement must somehow be relevant to the party, they instantly decode the implicature. They extract the hidden rejection. It's wild that we do this constantly. You communicated far more than you actually said.
And our final section, Section 5, Schemas and Scripts, the case file. Finally, let's look at how we utilize our own background case files to fill in the massive gaps left in everyday communication. We don't just rely on the words we hear, we rely on our memories to instantly set the stage. When you read a story, the author doesn't need to explain what a shopping cart is or what a checkout aisle looks like because you already have a static schema in your brain to build that scene. A schema is just a conventional knowledge structure in your memory. It's a mental blueprint. If I ask you right now to picture a classroom, you probably just pictured rows of desks facing a whiteboard, right? I didn't say any of those words, but your classroom schema automatically populated the room for you. Now, let's take that static blueprint and put it in motion. A script is simply a dynamic schema for a series of actions. It's the difference between a static photograph and a dynamic movie. Because we share event templates, I can say, "I went to a restaurant last night and the food was terrible." And you mentally fill in the entire sequence. I walked in, sat down, looked at a menu, ordered from a waiter, ate the food, and paid a bill. I don't have to state a single one of those steps because we are already operating on the exact same script. So the heavy lifting of discourse analysis actually happens right here, inside the brain. It relies on our pre-existing mental templates rather than just the audio waves hitting our ears. We use our stored background knowledge to constantly construct, predict, and decode reality. We are quite literally filling in the blinks at lightning speed just to make basic language function. As you go about your day, think about this provocative question and realize just how incredibly skilled you already are at the detective work of human communication. If most of what we truly mean is never actually said out loud, are we really just speaking words to each other? Or are we mostly just triggering shared scripts in each other's minds? Pay attention to the awkward pauses, the rapid assumptions, and the hidden rules operating all around you today. Thanks for exploring the analysis of discourse analysis with me.